Hi, we're Chris and Ashley, and this is a marriage surviving sexual addiction and infidelity. And the video that we'd like to do right now, I had someone request asking about how I handled when he would have relapses versus maybe how they should be handled, because we know that those are kind of two different things. I just want to say how I handled relapses, and everybody's going to handle them very differently. I handled every single one very, very differently. And mostly that comes from Chris was only ever honest with me about a relapse one time during our entire marriage. The rest of the time, I pulled it out of him, or I discovered it somehow. So that's what happened, and we're gonna do two videos. He's gonna talk about what he does with his relapses and how I handle relapses. So I would say I've handled them across the board. I handled one very upset, very angry. Some yelling was involved. I handled a different relapse very sad, very depressed. I handled another relapse. The one that he was honest with me about, I feel like that's the one I handled the best, where I just kind of was like, okay, well, thank you for telling me. Thank you. And let's get through this. And then, I was still sad. I was really sad, and we still had a couple of low days after that. But for the most part, for me, it got to the point where I'm like, I don't even care about the relapses. Just be honest with me. Like, the relapses were definitely not the hardest part. It was the lying. The lying was the worst for me. And not to say that a relapse doesn't hurt, because it does, but it was the lying for me that got to the point where I was just done. And so some of the ways that counselors would talk to me about relapses is they would say, well, don't shame him. And honestly, I kind of hated that. I hated it so bad, because I was like, I feel like you're shaming me by telling me not to shame him. Because I think the biggest thing that needs to be known is, as a wife who's been lied to over and over and over again through something like this, how you handle it first, it's probably not going to be great. It's probably very much so going to be like anger or sadness or whatever it may be. It's going to be handled probably pretty poorly up front. And if it's not handled poorly, then it's probably because there's been a lot of practice, which is also sad, And so it did get easier to handle it as time went on. And as time went on, it would be like, sometimes it was just like, you know what, I just can't deal with this. And that's what some of the counselors said. So the counselor said, if you can't handle it, or if you can't deal with it in a nice way, I want to call it nice way. I don't know if you can say that. I don't know. Whatever. But if you can't handle it in a productive way, meaning you're going to get somewhere from it like
being a point to talk about it.
Yeah, being in a point to talk about it, then walk away from the situation. And we'll talk about boundaries and bottom lines and stuff in another video, but that can mean whatever, whether that's sleeping in different rooms for the night, or asking to leave for a while, whatever that looks like for you. Sometimes that was what was needed, and that's very a healthy approach. The other things that they said are like to write feelings down. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can approach a relapse, where if standing in front of that person who has just betrayed you again, who has just lied to you again, is too difficult, I just took as many ways as I could. And I'm a communicator, so it was fine with me to talk, but sometimes my talking was not nice and it wasn't productive. And so I had to learn from those things, because I didn't want to get in a big fight, and I don't want to shame him, but I also want to make it very clear out there to wives that it might take a couple days. It might take a few days for you to be able to handle that betrayal and that hurt and pain in a healthy, productive way. I mean, it's not going to be super easy. And so that's basically what I have to say about relapses. Ours is kind of a different situation in that sometimes when you hear this in marriages, you hear about relapses that happen once a week, constantly, daily, this and that. That happened throughout our entire marriage, but I didn't know. I didn't know about any of his relapses. Had no idea that he was into pornography. So that didn't happen for 8 years in. And then when it all became discovered, as I said, he never really revealed to me that he had a relapse. It was always pulled out of him or caught of some sort. And that was very difficult. And it really only happened a handful of times. But
each period was
a long.
It wasn't
period.
Just one time. It was, one was a 6-week period of just prolonged lying and back into it before it kind of came forth. The time I was honest, it happened and immediately came forth with it. And I'll talk about that, but
and so I set up some boundaries, and Chris is going to talk about that on his portion, but some boundaries that I needed. And that's the biggest thing, I think, is you set up, for a wife's perspective, you set up what you need. And what I needed was to be told within 24 hours. And what I needed was to be able to have him communicate it in some way, shape, or form. And so we've set up a few things, and like I said, he'll mention it in his video, because I think it's really helpful to hear about how he handled his relapses. And mine is mostly like I can't give a very perfect set way to talk about it because it was different for me every single time, and I think it's different for every single person every single time. It's just a matter of knowing that it's okay to step away from that conversation for a while because you may not be able to handle it. Yeah, take some space, take some time. And if you don't, and if you do freak out, and if you do get mad, I guess the biggest thing I could say there is that I sure hope that that spouse has a lot of empathy and compassion, because you just betrayed your spouse again, and that spouse is going to feel it, and they're going to hurt, and they're going to feel pain. And so that's what I reminded Chris constantly. Like, before I'd even go into a conversation, I would constantly say, I'm going to need you to be patient with me because I am not happy and I am very upset, and you're going to hear about it. And he just kind of was like, yeah, okay. And he sat there.
I wouldn't say it was always that. I mean, it certainly has grown into that.
Yeah. Sometimes it was just hard for him.
The beginning period, it's the addict, wants to beat yourself up, wants to feel lousy, feel worthless. And so if it's, if there's any sense of anger or disappointment, I'm going to take that and I'm going to blow that up internally in order to kind of remain in that cycle of I'm worthless, I'm terrible, so I'm going to keep doing this because I'm worthless.
Right.
So that grows into that, and it needs to grow fast, and that took lots of counseling. That took lots of work.
Yeah.
That took periods of counseling on my part where it was not in and around the addiction. It was purely on self-worth. Who am I? Who am I as an individual? Why do I have worth? And learning to have confidence in myself as a person.
Yeah. And I would just say, again, the biggest thing that I can say is be patient with yourselves in this. You're both learning, you're both growing, and understanding that it's just not going to be a perfect reaction. Every counselor in the world could paint you a picture perfect way to handle it. And when push comes to shove and all those emotions are raw and it's happening right there in front of your face, you might throw every single piece of advice out the window that you ever got, and that's okay, because you're going to handle it the way that you're going to handle it. It's just a matter of getting to the point and growing together and working together to find a way to be able to handle those relapses. And they are painful, because I will tell you right now, I didn't ever think he would relapse after this.
And I didn't.
Yeah. Either. After this big blow came out, and I'm like, no way. I mean, he saw everything that this did to his family. He almost lost his family. There's no way he'll ever have another relapse. but an addict is an addict. And I don't want to make it seem like that's hopeless for people. It's just, it takes a lot of help to get out of that cycle. And so when I didn't realize that and he started having relapses, I was like, him and I both were like, he's never going to get over this. He's never going to find sobriety, but he did. It just took a long time and a lot of work. So I think patience, time, and compassion on yourself for how you handle it. There's no perfect way, and that's okay. It's just working together to find the way that works best for you. So thank you, and we'll have Chris do his next.